interview. Madhu, I'd like to start by asking you if you can give us a brief overview about BNP Paribas and your role in the organization.
Absolutely. So BNP Paribas Securities Services is a full solution security services provider in Asia Pacific. Globally, we're represented in over 100 countries, and we provide a full set of solutions to asset managers, asset owners, and banks and broker-dealers. My role in the organization is to head up the investment reporting and performance business for the Asia Pacific region. In that role, we produce a whole series of analytics, including risk, performance, and attribution for complex strategies for our institutional clients, whether they're asset managers or asset owners.
Right. So can you give us an overview of the current performance measurement framework and your suggestions on how to enhance it?
So the current performance measurement framework is very much after the fact. It's measuring performance on portfolios or on strategies against benchmarks. Typically, it can be monthly, reported quarterly. Sometimes people want it daily as well. One of the things that we could think about in terms of improving the framework is adding some value through risk analyses as well. For example, many people, when they think about return, also have to think about risk, because without risk you don't get the return. So we can think about adding ex post or historical risk analyses. We can also think about adding some forecast risk analyses into the mix as well. It's also important to think about things such as attribution. So for example, a lot of institutional investors are going into fixed income, and what that really means is that they need bespoke attribution models to help them understand where the managers added or lost value and how they're going about meeting their own objectives. And the third thing I would say is very much a people element. So not just focusing on the numbers, but thinking about the people. A performance analyst's role is becoming more complex in terms of not just making sure the numbers are correct, but adding value through interpreting the numbers and helping clients look at their numbers and have informed conversations with their external or internal counterparts.
What are the key challenges in risk-adjusted performance measurement, and what kind of impact will it create?
There are many challenges. One, I think it's going to have lots of impact in terms of the systems, in terms of the data, because a lot of people have been focusing, as I say, just on performance. When you're thinking about risk-adjusted performance and risk-adjusted returns, suddenly you have to think a lot more about the data elements and whether systems are actually built to cope with the enormous needs. The second thing I would say is that also comes down to, as I said before, people. Typically people are either performance people or risk people, and so the question is, do people have the intellectual firepower, the training, the world experience to be able to convert those numbers into meaningful information for boards, for trustees, for asset managers, and for CIOs to act upon. So there's some of the challenges. I won't talk about methodologies because I think there's always new methodologies, new risk statistics coming up all the time. And so I think my challenge, and certainly the challenges that I'm seeing my clients face, are more in the region of how to cope with the systems, how to cope with the data, and how to cope with the reporting as well. Where do they get the information from? How do they present it? And how do people actually make use of the numbers so they can get informed decisions out of the numbers? So I think there are some of the key challenges.
Now, outsourcing of risk is a phrase we hear a lot these days. What's the business case for outsourcing of risk and performance management?
Okay, so I'm going to approach this from, hopefully, as I've said, an informed position. I've worked both in middle office, front office. I've worked as a service provider and as someone who's consuming services. So my perspective is that outsourcing definitely has its place in performance and risk management. It doesn't mean that the business case is solely based on cost. I think historically people thought a lot about cost, but they're seeing more that it's about the value proposition. What does a service provider bring to their business? How does the service provider add value to their business? And how does the service provider improve their own bottom line? That's really where I see a lot of the business case for outsourcing coming through nowadays. As I say, cost is still part of the equation, but when you think about someone like BNP Paribas as a security service provider, and my own business line in investment reporting and performance, one of the things that we bring to the table is the ability for an asset manager or an asset owner to really focus on their own business and improving their own business lines. not having to worry about the data, not having to worry about the systems, not having to worry about the IT, the people, and all the other associated costs. And believe you me, they are quite significant. And for us, it is our core business. It's what we do best, and that's where we really see the value add come from outsourcing.
So what are the key considerations when evaluating an outsourcing option?
Key considerations, again, let's go back to this cost equation. A lot of people will say it's just about cost, it's just about dollars. Well, let's think about the fact that your IT footprint, if you have to, as an asset manager or an asset owner, put in a performance system, a risk system, a database for indices, data feeds, reporting systems, that's a lot of IT to maintain. You need business analysts, you need performance analysts, you need lots and lots of people within your organization who, let's face it, are a cost center. Now, you also have to make sure that you give these people careers. You can't just put in a system, put in a team, and expect them to do the same job for 10 years. So from a systems, from a data, from a people perspective, you can see that there's a lot of value from aligning with a global world-class service provider to provide the outsourcing needs. Now, does this mean 100% outsourcing? A lot of people will say, well, you can't really outsource everything. Okay, we need to be very close to the fund managers to understand the process and to be able to provide the high-level analytics, because after all, it is value added that we're talking about here. Well, my response to that is, I think both can work. I think you still need to have someone within a front office who understands performance, understands attribution, and understands risk, but at the same time, they're not sitting there overburdened with all the work that has to go into producing a performance report or a fact sheet or any of the other analyses that a service provider can provide. If you think about a service provider, we can manage data, we can manage volumes, we can manage workloads, and we can manage all the things that an asset manager really doesn't have to focus on, because they're not revenue generating lines of business for them. For an asset owner, again, the same principle applies. In fact, what we're seeing a lot of is large institutional asset owners. You've got sovereign wealth funds, you have central banks, large pension funds. In Australia, for example, you've got superannuation funds. They're being burdened by all the demands internally and externally, regulation, reporting to trustees, reporting to various industry bodies and counterparts. How do they solve all these problems by themselves? So I think when you look at it from an outsourcing perspective and relying upon a service provider, it makes a lot more sense. But I will say that I think going to a service provider has to be done in partnership. As I say, if it's just based purely on cost, I don't think sometimes it's going to work that well. But from a partnership perspective, there's going to be a lot of value added, there's going to be a lot of benefit to the businesses of an asset manager and an asset owner as well.
So considering all of these, in your opinion, are there more pros than cons in outsourcing? And can you share some details?
Sure. I would say, again, based on my experience of being on both sides of the fence, there are more pros than cons in outsourcing. Now, as an example of this, I used to work in the front office. And for me, I wanted to concentrate on managing money, making sure my fund was earning money and making alpha. I didn't want to spend all the time thinking about how the reports were going to be built, whether my clients were seeing my reports in the right format, whether I was getting the right information through to various constituencies. I relied on my service provider to do that. And now I'm on the other side of the fence as a service provider. I can tell you that's something that comes easily to us, because that's our core business. We deal with hundreds and hundreds of these reports on a daily basis globally. So for us, it comes naturally to be able to provide a proper outsourced service. And I think the other important thing is, the other pro, rather than a con, is the consistency of approach. So when we deal with a client, whether they're coming from Singapore or in the UK or in Australia or in the US, we can apply the same consistent approach. We look at the same consistent methodologies for performance. We apply a world-class tested system for attribution and for risk, and we can make sure that when a client comes to us, they're getting a full surround service solution. So I think that's really where the pros of outsourcing comes from. And as I say, I'm coming from a position of experience in both sides of the fence, and I think I definitely see a lot more pros for outsourcing than anything else.
Well, thank you so much, Madhu. These are really insightful comments from you, and we look forward to your presentation at the 6th Annual Investment Performance and Risk Management Asia Conference 2013.
Right, thank you very much. Appreciate being there.